Welcome. Tonight, we journey through three quiet tales from the past. First, walk beside two brothers as they explore a lively village festival in the 1600s. Then, step into the soft rhythms of a castle maid's gentle routine. And finally, follow the path of a thief who found redemption and became a guardian of peace. Let your thoughts drift, your breathing slow, and let these stories carry you gently toward rest. The Festival of Saint Hilarion. It was the year 1603, in the quaint village of Alderwick, nestled deep in the rolling hills of southern England. Life moved with the slow rhythm of ploughs and prayer, but once each year, on the feast day of Saint Hilarion, the village erupted in joyous celebration. The festival was more than mere revelry, it was a sacred tradition, a moment where time itself seemed to pause. In a modest wattle and daub cottage on the outskirts of the village lived two brothers, Thomas and Edward Redwick. Thomas, the elder by 5 years, was broad-shouldered and practical, his hands calloused from the forge where he apprenticed with the village blacksmith. Edward, slender and imaginative, spent his days helping the parish scribe and dreaming of faraway lands. As the golden sun pierced the morning mist, the boys woke to the distant tolling of the church bell. The festival of Saint Hilarion had begun. Their mother, a stern but loving woman named Agnes, had been up since dawn baking honey cakes and roasting a goose, which would be their contribution to the village feast. The smell of rosemary and sage filled the cottage, making Edward's stomach rumble. "Up, boys," she called. "Wash and dress. The procession starts at noon." The brothers pulled on their best tunics, Edward in blue, Thomas in green. They joined the stream of villagers moving toward the church, where Father Elric stood in his golden vestments, ready to bless the festival. A great wooden cart adorned with garlands of wildflowers led the procession. Upon it stood a statue of Saint Hilarion, arms raised in eternal benediction. The villagers followed, singing hymns and tossing petals. Children danced, and old men tapped tambourines. The festival had begun. After the blessing, the crowd poured into the market square. Booths and stalls had sprouted overnight like mushrooms after rain. Merchants from nearby towns hawked their wares, silks from the east, tin trinkets, hand-painted dolls, and sugar candies wrapped in paper. Edward's eyes sparkled at the sight of a juggler tossing torches. "Come on," he tugged at Thomas, who was eyeing a cart laden with iron tools. "We've all day," Thomas said with a grin. "Let's see it all." They wandered from stall to stall. A puppeteer enchanted children with the tale of King Arthur, using painted wooden dolls. A minstrel sang songs of brave knights and fair maidens, accompanied by a lute. The smell of roasting meat, freshly baked bread, and sweetmeats hung heavy in the air. Edward bought a candied apple. Thomas, ever practical, spent his coin on a new pair of leather gloves. They laughed at the antics of a fool dressed in motley who balanced on stilts and told ribald jokes. As midday gave way to afternoon, the village green became the stage for contests and games. Children played hoop and stick, while adults tested their mettle in archery, wrestling, and the maypole dance. Thomas, strong and confident, entered the wrestling match. He squared off against a burly man from a neighboring village. The match was fierce but good-natured. With a clever twist, Thomas brought his opponent to the ground and was declared the victor. He was awarded a garland of ivy and a clay jug of ale. Edward joined the storytelling contest. Standing atop a wooden crate, he spun a tale of a dragon who guarded a lost city of gold. His voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the story, capturing the crowd's imagination. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. "You've a gift, lad," said Father Elric, patting him on the back. As the sun began to set, long tables were laid out in the square, covered with white cloths. The feast was a communal affair. Platters of food were brought forth, roasted goose, smoked fish, barley stew, sweet tarts, and mulled cider. The air rang with laughter, music, and the clink of mugs. The brothers sat beside their mother, who beamed with pride. They ate until their bellies ached. The food was hearty and comforting, and every dish tasted of tradition and love. Then came the mummers, performing a play about Saint Hilarion's miracles. With painted faces and exaggerated gestures, they told of the saint curing a blind man and saving a ship from a storm. The villagers cheered, children gasped, and for a moment, the boundary between myth and reality blurred. Later that night, lanterns were lit and hung from every tree and beam. Music played from fiddles and drums, and the village danced. Edward and Thomas found themselves under the old elm tree where village youth gathered. Thomas shyly asked a girl named Ellen to dance. She accepted with a smile, and they moved with the rhythm of the music. Edward sat nearby, watching the fireflies and scribbling lines of poetry in his little book. A girl his age, Martha, peered over his shoulder. "Write me a verse," she asked. He blushed but nodded. He wrote, "In lantern light your eyes do gleam, like starlit skies within a dream." She smiled and kissed his cheek. The hour grew late. One by one, villagers drifted home. The fire burned low, and the music faded into the night. As they walked back, Edward spoke first. "Do you think every year will feel like this?" Thomas shrugged, then nodded. "Maybe not the same, but always special. This is ours, our place, our people." Their mother was waiting with warm cider. She kissed them both on the forehead. "You've made me proud today." They sat in silence for a moment, the glow of the fire warming their faces. Outside, the moon watched over Alderwick, and the village, still humming with joy, began to dream. Years later, Edward would write of that day in a leather-bound book that would become cherished in the village library. Thomas would take over the forge, marry Ellen, and raise children who would dance under lanterns. But that one day, of music and joy, of food and firelight, of two brothers living fully, remained eternal, like the saint they honored, in the heart of Alderwick. Dust and Silence, the life of a castle maid. The sun barely peeked over the eastern horizon as Elsbeth Kerran rose from her straw mattress, tucked neatly in the small servants' quarters nestled at the back of Greywick Castle. Her room, if it could be called that, was no more than a stone alcove with a narrow window and a small chest for her possessions. Yet she loved it. It was hers. And in it, she slept dreamlessly, undisturbed by the cold winds that rattled the castle's towering battlements. Each morning, the rhythm of her world began with the same ritual: rise with the light, stretch the stiffness from her limbs, and wash her face in a basin of cold water. The chill always woke her properly. No coffee, no breakfast until her first task was done. That was the rule, and she liked it. She dressed in her simple woolen gown, patched but tidy, and wrapped a linen kerchief over her dark hair. She opened the door quietly, out of respect for the other maids still stirring in their rooms, and stepped out into the long stone corridor. The castle was still. Still and soft. Elsbeth always felt it held its breath in those early hours, when only the torches on the walls flickered and the great hall stood empty. Her footsteps echoed gently, a whisper in the quiet. This, she thought, was her favorite time of day. Her first job was the upper gallery, an arched corridor that overlooked the great hall below. She carried her broom and her rag bucket with practiced ease, pausing only once to glance at the colourful glass in the tall windows. As sunlight began to filter through the panes, it painted the floor in fractured reds and blues. She never tired of seeing that. The light changed with the seasons, with the weather, with time itself. She swept. She dusted. She polished the ancient oak banisters until they gleamed faintly in the dim light. It was quiet work. Thoughtless, almost. But that was the gift of it. Her hands knew what to do, and her mind was free to drift. She imagined the footsteps that had walked the gallery centuries ago, queens in heavy silks, knights in armor, young pages darting by with messages. Now it was she who passed through. Invisible, but no less present. By mid-morning, The castle was waking up. Other servants bustled in the halls, and distant voices began to echo from the kitchens. But Elsbeth remained in her own slow rhythm. She moved from room to room, the small chapel, the library, the guest quarters, each with its own scent, its own silence. She liked the library best. The smell of old parchment, beeswax, and lavender hung in the air. She never read the books, those were for the Lord and his family, but she often paused to trace their spines with a finger. Her favorite was a red-bound volume with golden etching that shimmered in the dusty light. Lunch was bread and broth in the servants' hall, eaten quietly among the others. No one talked much during the day. They had their own jobs, their own private patterns. Elsbeth didn't mind. She liked the quiet. The afternoons were for polishing. Doorknobs, sconces, candelabras, and the great iron chandelier that hung over the main staircase. She had a special stool for reaching the lower arms and had learned how to tie her rag to a stick for the rest. She worked in silence, the metal warming beneath her hands. It gleamed under her touch, like a small sun caught indoors. Sometimes, she would stop and just sit on the steps. Let the world pass her by. She didn't always need to move. The castle didn't mind if she paused. Once, she found a bird caught in the kitchen passage, wings flapping in panic against the stone walls. She cupped it gently and carried it to the courtyard, where it fluttered into the sky. That moment stayed with her. It was small, but it was hers. She never dreamed of leaving. Others talked of cities, of markets, of marriage and change. Elsbeth just smiled. She had her rooms, her rags, her rhythm. That was enough. Evening came quietly. She cleaned the ash from the fireplaces and prepared fresh logs for the next morning. She wiped the tables and swept the flagstones one last time. By the time the sun had dipped below the hills, her work was done. She returned to her room, unwound her kerchief, washed again in cold water, sat on her bed and let the day fade from her hands. Sometimes, she hummed a little tune her mother once sang. A lullaby. A song with no words, just the rhythm of peace. The castle was quiet again. Breathing. Watching. And Elsbeth slept, wrapped in the comfort of her simple, perfect day. Tomorrow, it would begin again. And she wouldn't change a thing. From Shadows to Sanctuary, the story of Callan Drest. Callan Drest was born on a bitter winter night, the kind where the wind cuts like a blade and the streets lie silent beneath a crust of frozen mud. He came into the world in a cramped room above a tavern in the slums of Wetherton, a small but bustling town nestled at the edge of the eastern moors. His mother, Mara, worked as a laundress. His father, if he ever had one, was a name never spoken. Mara was a quiet woman, with hands rough from soap and water and eyes always rimmed with fatigue. But she had warmth in her voice, and a quiet strength that made Callan feel safe even when the roof leaked and the cupboards were bare. She taught him to read using scraps of old parchment, whispered lullabies as she scrubbed clothes, and always shared her meager meals without complaint. She would tell him stories of kindness, of heroes who rose from nothing. "The world isn't fair, Callan," she'd say, brushing his hair back with her calloused hand. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying to be good in it." From the start, life was hard. The kind of hard that doesn't leave room for dreams. Callan learned to walk by stumbling through alleyways, to speak by trading words with drunks and vagrants. He learned quickly, and more importantly, he learned quietly. By the time he was 10, Mara had fallen ill with a fever that wouldn't go. The apothecary refused to help without coin, and Callan, desperate and terrified, found himself in front of a baker's stall one cold evening. The smell of warm bread was too much. He grabbed a loaf and ran. He was caught, of course. A strong hand on his collar, a fist to the cheek, and a night in the stocks. But that night changed him. Not out of fear, but out of revelation. He'd stolen and eaten. And he'd survived. So he stole again. And again. By 12, he could pick a pocket clean without a glance. By 15, he was running errands for the gutter gangs that operated in the dark underbelly of Weatherton, delivering messages, moving stolen goods, occasionally unlocking a back door with nimble fingers. But the victories were hollow. Each theft fed his belly, but drained his spirit. Mara's health worsened, and eventually, she passed in her sleep, frail and worn. Callan never forgave himself for not being able to save her. After her death, he hardened. He joined a crew led by a man named Breeze, charismatic, ruthless, and utterly without conscience. One job, when Callan was 17, nearly destroyed him. They were hired to rob a traveling physician who had arrived in town with medical supplies. Callan hesitated, remembering his mother, remembering what medicine could have meant for her. Breeze noticed. Later that night, Breeze cornered him in the alley. "Second guess me again, and I'll leave your body where the rats can't find it," he spat. The betrayal came 2 winters later. Callan had started keeping coin aside, small portions from each job, hidden beneath the chapel steps. He had dreams of leaving, starting anew in another town. Breeze found the stash. Callan came back to find it gone and a message carved into the stone, "No one leaves." That night, something in him broke. The gang was no longer his shield, it was his shackle. One night, he took part in a larger job, a wealthy merchant's house, left empty while the family attended a wedding in the next town. Callan was inside in moments, moving like a shadow. He found silver candlesticks, jeweled combs, a purse heavy with gold. But in a child's room, he also found a stuffed bear and a half-finished drawing on the floor. It hit him like a slap. This wasn't just a job. This was someone's home. He didn't tell the others, but that night, he slipped away from the group and left most of his haul on the church steps. He didn't know why. It just felt right. The transformation began slowly. He stopped attending meetings. Avoided old friends. Spent more time in the chapel's shadow, drawing comfort from its quiet. Father Imric, the aging priest, became a silent mentor. He didn't ask questions. Only gave space, and when Callan was ready, he filled it with kindness. Then came the winter of his 19th year. A bad season. Food was scarce. People turned desperate. One of Callan's old gangmates, Joran, pulled him into a robbery that went wrong. A guard was wounded. Callan didn't strike the blow, but he helped them escape. And that night, as snow fell like ash from the sky, he went to the chapel instead of the hideout. He fell to his knees. Begged forgiveness. Not just from the gods, but from himself. Father Imric found him in the morning. Cold, shivering, his eyes red. "Help me," Callan whispered. And the priest did. Not with judgment, but with warmth. Callan started helping around the chapel, cleaning pews, hauling firewood, lighting candles. At first, he still slept in alleys. But Imric gave him a cot in the back room, and soon, Callan found himself with something he'd never had before, a routine. The transformation was not immediate. There were nights when he lay awake, tempted to steal from the very donation box he now guarded. Moments when the ghosts of his past whispered of easier paths. But each day he chose differently. He began to see the town not through the eyes of a thief, but as someone who belonged to it. He helped repair broken benches, soothed frightened children, and listened to the worries of strangers. It wasn't easy. He had to fight the old instincts, to take, to lie, to run. Sometimes people recognized him and spat in his direction. But he didn't retaliate. He simply worked. Years passed. He grew stronger, wiser. He learned the value of silence, the weight of honesty. And in time, he was trusted. When the old church guard retired, it was Callan who took up the post. not with armor and sword, but with a staff and a watchful eye. He protected the chapel not just from theft, but from despair. He welcomed the poor, the sick, the lost. He became a symbol of change. One person who noticed this change was Tolan, a former pickpocket and an acquaintance from Callan's youth. Tolan had once been just as skilled with sleight of hand, perhaps even more so. But where Callan had pulled away from that life, Tolan dove deeper. They met again when Tolan tried to lift a purse from a merchant outside the chapel. Callan caught his wrist, not with anger, but with recognition. "There's another way," he said. Tolan resisted at first. Mocked Callan, called him a traitor. But hunger has a way of softening pride. Eventually, he began showing up during the evenings, helping with the firewood, listening to Father Imric's lessons. He stumbled often, slipped back into bad habits. But Callan didn't give up on him. Because someone once hadn't given up on Callan. Now, Tolan tends the chapel garden. He grows herbs and vegetables. He sings to the plants in the morning. And when new vagrants arrive, he's the first to greet them. Callan watches with quiet pride. He knows redemption is not a path walked alone. Becoming a guard changed how Callan saw himself. No longer a shadow on the edge of the crowd, he stood tall in the center of it. People spoke to him, trusted him, smiled when he passed. He was finally what his mother always told him he could be: good. Children waved to him as he passed. Elders nodded in respect. He had found his place, not as a thief in the night, but as a guardian of peace. And every now and then, when no one watched, he would leave a coin on the chapel step. A quiet reminder of where he had come from. Not all stories begin in light. Some begin in shadow. But it is not where we start that defines us. It is where we choose to walk. Thank you for listening. As the last echoes of these stories fade, may your mind be still and your dreams kind. Sleep well. And when you wake, may you carry a little peace from these worlds with you. If you enjoyed this time of quiet, consider subscribing for more stories to fall asleep to. Good night.